Good evening and welcome. I am Amarachi Ubani. Tonight, court remands AAC presidential candidate Omoyele Sowore and his partner Olawale Bakare in DSS custody over alleged treasonable felony and conspiracy to carry out revolution protest aimed at removing the president. Gunmen disrupt legislative activities in Bayelsa State House of Assembly as lawmakers allegedly impeach Speaker. Tonight, Nigeria's foreign relations comes under the spotlight as we review the country's diplomatic ties and agreements ahead of the independence anniversary. And Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky doubtful of publishing Kiev's version of Trump phone call transcript amid impeachment threats.
Business news tonight. Central Bank and the Bankers Committee to commence the implementation of 22 billion naira creative industry initiative with the takeover of the National Theatre.
And on sports news tonight, World Football Governing Body FIFA orders Cardiff City to pay Nantes £5.3 million for late Emiliano Sala transfer.
It's been a day of litigation and defense for the Department of State Services as the agency today arraigned the convener of the #RevolutionNow protest, Mr. Omoyele Sowore, before the Federal High Court in Abuja. Although it's Mr. Sowore's major arraignment, the court, however, ordered that he be returned to the custody of the Department of State Services pending the hearing of his formal bail application on Friday, October 4th. Mr. Sowore and his co-defendant, Mr. Olawale Bakare, pleaded not guilty to a 7-count charge of conspiracy to commit treason, treasonable felony, and money laundering brought against them by the federal government. Our correspondent, Amaka Okafo, reports.
Revolution! Now! Move now!
Mr. Omoyele Sowore and his co-defendant, Mr. Olawale Bakare, arrived in the court to the embrace of their ecstatic supporters. Operatives of the Department of State Services had brought them through the back door of the court. After a couple of cases were heard by the court, the case involving Mr. Sowore was called. His counsel, Mr. Adeyinka Olumide Fusika, told the court that his clients were not ready to take their plea because they had not been given the opportunity to interact with their lawyers. And an order for bail by the Federal High Court has not been complied with by the Department of State Services. This position was rejected by the prosecuting counsel, Mr. Hassan Liman, who insisted that the defendant had been properly served 10 days ago and the case was ripe for hearing. In a short ruling, the trial judge, Justice Ijoma Ojukwu, held that the arraignment is not in breach of any law. She insisted that the order for bail did not say that the defendants cannot be arraigned. She then ordered that the charges be read to the defendants. 7 counts of conspiracy to commit treason, treasonable felony, and allegation of money laundering to the tune of over $51,000 were read to Mr. Sowore and his co-defendant, to which they entered a not guilty plea. Counsel to Mr. Sowore attempted to make an oral application for bail, but Justice Ojukwu asked him to make a formal application because it is a fresh case. At this point, counsel to Sowore applied for a short adjournment to enable him file the bail application. Justice Ojukwu, in a short ruling, fixed October 4th for hearing of the bail application and ordered that the defendants be remanded in the custody of the DSS.
Freedom, just like clockwork, it will surely come for those who suffer this kind of deprivation. No condition is permanent.
Outside the court, Mr. Sowore attempted to speak to journalists, but that was rebuffed by security operatives, leading to an altercation.
This is a lawless country. Nigeria must fight for its soul and ensure that the revolution that gives our people a chance to have a control of the world. Revolution! Now!
Mr. Sowore was arrested on August 3rd in Lagos by operatives of the DSS. Amaka Okafo, Channels Television News.
Meanwhile, the DSS has released from its custody Mr. Chido Onoma, a journalist activist who is also a columnist with an online news medium, after several hours of interrogation. Mr. Onoma was picked up on Sunday at the Nnamdi Azikiwe International Airport, Abuja, on his arrival from a trip abroad where he had obtained a PhD on communication studies. Meanwhile, the DSS has denied arresting Mr. Onoma, insisting he was only invited for questioning over an act capable of undermining public order and national security. The DSS explained in a statement by its spokesperson, Mr. Peter Afunaya, that he was invited for wearing a T-shirt with the inscription, "We are all Biafrans," for which he says Mr. Onoma could have been attacked by a mob if he had worn it. A columnist is the author of a book titled "We Are All Biafrans." In the book, he highlights some of the challenges of the country and makes a strong case for restructuring. The Bayelsa State House of Assembly complex was thrown into a frenzy today after gunmen stormed the complex, shooting sporadically and dispersing everyone in sight. The situation, however, forced the Speaker to adjourn plenary indefinitely. That decision, however, did not go down well with everyone. Other lawmakers in the Assembly say they had carried out an impeachment, but the Speaker insists he's still in charge.
Gunshots ringing, people scampering for their lives. If there was any doubt that the political scene in Bayelsa State was going through trying times, then this chaotic scene at the State House of Assembly should put the matter to rest. How did it get to this point? The problem started with the emergence of the senator representing Bayelsa Central District, Doye Diri, as a flag bearer of the People's Democratic Party at the upcoming governorship election. That fueled speculations that the Speaker of the House, Tonya Esena, would have to resign his position immediately, as he and the party candidate are from the same local government area. But it seemed the Speaker may have sensed foul play brewing, because no sooner than the House sat for plenary, there was a call for an indefinite recess.
I wish to sit here at this House
to the amazement of other members who planned to oust him. This led to the chaos. Once calm was restored, a counteraction was taken in the chambers. Some members of the House gathered to elect a new speaker in the person of Monday Obolo, who is from the southern Ijaw local government area. Away from the House, Honorable Esena insists to remain the Speaker, saying although he has no qualms about leaving the seat, but it would be unfair for him to be forced out sooner than agreed.
I am Speaker of the state, not Speaker of any group. And so this morning I went there, and maybe the anticipation, everybody was expecting I was going to resign and maybe a Speaker was going to be elected. So that's the idea I don't understand. We're all working towards it. We're a party on ground. It doesn't matter taking the speakership to anywhere to win an election. If we campaign well, work hard well with our policies, and with what the governor has done, we're supposed to have won this election. So why should I now be the sacrificial lamb? I'm making it look like I am against Kolokumo Pokma producing the governor. That's not correct. That's not right.
The news of the crisis is on the lips of the ordinary people on the streets in Bayelsa, and the debate of the legality of all claims by warring factions will no doubt be heated. Whichever way their arguments align, the long-term focus by all should be an amicable end to this matter, and any threat to democracy in the state should not be allowed to stand.
There have been many interpretations to Nigeria's foreign policy, but Africa remains at the center. From the time of independence till now, foreign policy has been a reflection of domestic policy as Nigeria dominated affairs on the continent. Tonight, we continue with our special focus on Nigeria's independence anniversary, with our next report seeking to determine whether or not Nigeria's foreign policy has remained focused on Africa.
Current attempts to help develop Africa by industrial countries are uncoordinated and plainly incremental.
With that, Nigeria's President Muhammadu Buhari, the fifth speaker at this year's United Nations General Assembly, was put on a pedestal as the first African leader to address the 74th Assembly of the Heads of State and Governments. Not far from the UN Secretary General and the United States President Donald Trump. It was definitely a shift from the past where her slot could be on the second or third day of the world event, when most leaders would have presented their addresses and left. And it was a move that did not go unnoticed by the president's team.
It's like it's Nigeria's day in the sun, because you don't have it better than that. The Deputy Secretary General, President of the General Assembly, and then you are President of that country. It's like all focus will be on Nigeria.
Back in Nigeria, Africa remains the center stage of Nigeria's foreign policy. Though interpreted to reflect her domestic policy under its military and civilian administrations. Federal policy was said to have been clear-cut under Federal Prime Minister Alhaji Abubakar Tafawa Balewa. Either support the West and be in good and respectable company, or support the communist powers and be in company of the devil. The policy of non-alignment, the declared foundation of Nigerian foreign policy, was nothing more than a facade. But it was also under military regime that she began to assume leading role on the continent and chairmanship of the Organization of African Unity. Wealth realized from the discovery of oil provided an opportunity for her to become benefactor to weak African countries.
The military regime, there was no assembly, no national assembly. Everything was done by fiat. The military head of state or president can say, allocate some amount of money to the Minister of Foreign Affairs to pursue so and so issue. But right now, everything has to go through the democratic process of the National Assembly. And it's not been easy for the Minister of Foreign Affairs to get to grips with many of his functions because of lack of funds.
With the return of democracy in 1999, Nigeria's image abroad was said to have improved. Nigeria was considered a powerhouse in the region in economic and security affairs. But perhaps the greatest tests to Nigeria's foreign policy have come during civilian administrations, with the onset of insurgency not only in the country, but in West Africa. Thankfully, Nigeria continues to lead security cooperation in this regard. The peaceful transition of power from the Jonathan administration to the Buhari administration further boosted the country's standing in the international community. Some scholars believe visits by world leaders and high-profile guests attest to this confidence to maintain relations with Nigeria. And then came one of the worst xenophobic attacks in South Africa, one of the beneficiaries of Nigeria's largesse and support in its anti-apartheid era. Amidst outrage by Nigerians over the attacks on their businesses, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Jeffrey Onyema, struggled to become the face behind Nigeria's decisions on the matter, amidst efforts by the legislative and executive to control the situation.
Whatever measure that needs to be taken to ensure the safety of Nigerians in South Africa, we will take.
Nigeria continues to be a champion for the campaign against corruption, while remaining committed to many international organizations and binational commissions. In part two, after the break, U.S. President Donald Trump congratulates Nigeria on the eve of her 59th independence anniversary. Please stay with us.